Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for April 29th, 2025. It's been less than a week since I've sat down here to do an AM reading video, so I don't actually have a lot to talk about, but I'm very excited because I think I have my favorite read of the month in this batch. Well, maybe things will ultimately change, but I don't have a lot of time left in the month after all. But as usual in these videos, I'm going to start by reading a short story out of a literary journal. I am currently reading out of the New England Review, volume 45.3. And the story I read this week is called What Brothers Get by Joseph de la Torre. This story is told in two timelines, and these two brothers are about 11 years apart. And the beginning kind of makes it seem like maybe the older brother is a teen dad because he's getting his younger brother ready for school as a first grader. But then afterwards, through the title, and also you find out like just pretty soon afterwards that the father is there, but he is addicted. He has an addiction problem, and he's passed out, and actually it's even worse than that ultimately. But we get to mostly see through this, ritual of sending the boy off to elementary school for the first time, how much he relies on and loves his older brother, and his name is Davy, the younger brother, and the older brother's named Raphael. And this day is more momentous than just for that reason, ultimately, because their father actually overdoses. So anyway, I'll just skip to the second storyline briefly, which is 11 years later, and now Davy is like the 17-year-old almost out of high school, and he is going to LA for college, and it seems like part of that reason is because his older brother Raphael lives there. And Davy is driven to LA by his mother, who has now come into his life, and you're getting little hints about what happened and how the brothers were separated, and that now Davy's going to spend the night with Raphael, and his mother's a bit anxious about it. It's, a poor neighborhood. She's just worried about crime and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of tension, and the brothers haven't seen each other. And so in that storyline, they're going through their first night together in 11 years. And in the other storyline, Raphael had to call the police and social services when his father died. And they have no family in the area, so they have this like emergency foster care situation, which only lasts for a little while. And then it turns out that David's mother comes back, and David's mother had been someone who ran away from home and was addicted to drugs, but then I guess she went back to her parents and comes from money or security or something like that, and she is willing to take her son back at this point, but Raphael goes through the motions of debating, can I see if she'll also take me, because, technically these are half-brothers, and he thinks it's unlikely, since he's 17, and, it's like just stereotypes, I guess, about like taking on like a older teenager and that sort of thing, and it not being her son, and he ultimately decides not to go for it. And he does have an aunt in LA who didn't know about him because I guess the father, ran off too, in his younger years. But she does take her nephew in, and she is, more impoverished. She's in a Latin neighborhood that, does seem like it's, just has less money than it seems like David now lives in, and you get a little bit of a sense of what happens to Raphael, like that he does get his GED, and his aunt tries to get him to go to community college, but he does seem to find some security in the jobs he's able to get, and that's basically where he remains when David comes back, and now he's going to college in LA, but they have this moment together, and I guess the question in this story is like, they had this like really fierce relationship when, their father was alive, and they were basically taking care of each other, and like, would they be able to get that back after all of these years? And it's just, the first night, and David has a lot of culture shock about being in a new area, or an impoverished area maybe for the first time in a while, but I thought, what I liked, I guess, is like, that straining for a relationship, and like, the brothers trying to get to know each other again, and the reminder of, the way that maybe this sort of relationship is overlooked when it comes to, foster care and guardianship and that sort of thing, that, they had a deep, abiding love for each other, these two brothers as well. And now they're, I guess, you know, it's hopeful that maybe they can ultimately get it back. I do think the story was a little clunky with some exposition here and there, but it was a good topic. I also just started another short story collection I'll hopefully read through, probably going into May, but this is Cowboys and East Indians by Nina McConigley. This has been on my Goodreads TBR for long enough that it made my top of the Goodreads resolution for this year. So anyway, these stories I think are supposed to be about, you know, East Indians, in the American West. And in this first story, it's really a flash fiction story, and it takes place on the playground, like in elementary school. And the narrator, I think, you know, she grew up in America, or at least has been here long enough that she had a routine, and she was pretty light-skinned. And she says things changed for her when her darker-skinned cousin Sunil came to live with them, and that's when, you know, the neighborhood boys or so forth that, you know, were in school with them came to them and started calling them, you know, the N-word, and started, you know, putting in racial epithets having to do with African American history. So it talked about how red-faced and shamed the narrator was about that, and how Sunil was still just kept playing with his toy or his ball or what have you. And it seems like, you know, there's a cultural disconnect for him. Like when he's explaining to his aunt later what happened, he says the boys called him Snickers, and that I don't think he caught, you know, he doesn't understand or know the actual word and the context of the word they actually called him. And then there was I don't know, an interlude about, you know, how he, you know, is eating too much here and is getting fatter, and like, so, you know, the Snickers thing he likes because he likes the food. And I don't know, you know, these flash stories, you know, it's like this moment of life thing, but, you know, it almost feels a bit archetypal or something, but rather than, you know, fleshed out with, you know, characters and themes and all of that. But maybe some of these other stories will be longer and more involved, and I will check back. But the book I really wanted to talk about in this video is The Lager Queen of Minnesota by J. Ryan Stradl, which I read for my March page 112 tag. A bit late, but I'm so glad I finally got to it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, because actually page 112, and I think I thought this even when reading it in context, it's one of the weaker pages, where I feel like, you know, the humorous quips don't land as much, and it just happens to be a page that, I don't know, isn't all that meaningful, except that there's an antagonist, Brad Bart, who barely is in the story at all, but he made an impression on this page, and then ultimately, you know, the more main character, Diana, gets a little more comeuppance with him in a later chapter when he comes back in her life briefly. But anyway, what this story is predominantly about is about a Midwestern Minnesotan family, particularly the relationship between two sisters, which has always been a bit strained throughout their childhood because they're two very different people. Helen is this schemer and go-getter, and Edith is someone who I think just embraces the idea of just, you know, taking what you get and that sort of thing, and doesn't have as much motivation to go beyond that. So, you know, this story is also told out of order linearly, but the general gist is, you know, they're growing up on a farm in the 50s together, and Helen is starting to like beer, and she, you know, gets it into her head that she wants to be a brewer, which is just, you know, weird for her generation and all of that. And she's the younger sister. Edith is the older sister who marries at 20 and moves out with her husband, who gets a job driving trucks, and they live sort of a lower middle class lifestyle for a while until the husband, Stanley, he's having some dementia, and he ultimately has to, you know, leave his job because of that. And so Edith had been working some part-time stuff. She actually worked for 40 years cooking in a nursing home, and then, like, out of the blue, it seems like one of her pies wins, you know, a top pie contest in the state, and like it's drawn up as one of the best pies in Minnesota. And suddenly the nursing home is popping, and there's all these people trying to actually like get in like it's a restaurant because of her. And that kind of opened some doors for her that maybe she could take another job. And so they end up moving, and she works in a bakery for a while, making pies for like a handful of years, but then life gets in the way again, and the bakery shuts down. So Edith needs some part-time work again because her husband dies, and it's that's relatively expected, and he with his declining health, as we're going through the years of this story. But then something more tragic happens, that her daughter and her son-in-law are killed in a car accident suddenly. And their daughter, Diana, who's a teenager at the time, comes to live with Edith in her apartment. And so they're struggling. Diana is on food stamps at school. Her grandmother, is getting into her 60s and 70s and working, part-time retail jobs. And Diana is trying to help her out and in ways that I think Edith isn't fully aware of. But Diana is, basically getting by in school with iffy grades, not really doing homework because she's drawing up schemes all the time to help with the bills. And one of the major things she starts doing is she starts stealing like appliances to sell, like from people's garages and that sort of thing. And ultimately, she's caught by the neighbor doing this, and the neighbor basically, gives her the neighbor gives her a talking down, and it's stressful because they're thinking he could take her to the police and that sort of thing. But instead, he asks her why she does it, and she is explaining, but like, I'm helping my grandma with the bills, and it's not like he melts completely upon hearing that, but he does basically, I think in part he wants to prove that, somebody who starts with the means she has can make a life for herself. And he does that by actually giving her a job in his own brewery. And so anyway, I guess I'll jump back to the past with Helen. Helen goes off to college, and she's majoring in chemistry, and she wants to open a brewery, and she hooks up with a guy named Orwell Blotz, and she pursues him because his family owned a brewery. Now they're doing, pop. But it seems like Orwell also would like to go back to brewing. And Helen really is the one who has the stamina for this. And when she's in college, she's mixing brews and, really going after this whole thing. Ultimately, she and Orwell involved and are deciding to take over the family's business, but they need some capital for that. So, Helen and Edith's parents own this farm. Their mother dies, and their father's desolate, and he has these two daughters, neither of whom are involved in farming, so it seems like, ultimately they're going to have to sell the farm anyway. And Helen more or less makes a deal with him that instead of splitting it down the middle, the sale of the farm, to give it all to her to start her business. And that, the father ultimately says yes. I guess he's impressed by her, do-it attitude. But it causes this rift between the two sisters where Edith or Helen don't reach out to each other for 30, 40 years. But Helen is kind of like we check in with her sporadically throughout this book. And so we don't see her through a lot of the high days, but it does seem like Blotz is put on the map for a while and they have money. But we check back in with her in the early thousands when, the beer market has changed and it's more about, craft beers and that sort of thing. And they're struggling a bit more and trying to find out how to stay afloat. And then meanwhile, Diana is making craft beers in this completely other brewery. And so she doesn't end up going off to college. It seems like she might want to for a while to follow a boyfriend. But her life really becomes being part of this brewery and creating her own craft beers, especially at a young age, and we're seeing her struggle and succeed, and she ultimately marries a man in the distributor business, and they're in their 20s, and they're trying for a child, and she's ultimately trying to open up her own brewery as her old boss, has to step down for his own health and has to sell his own brewery. And so she's pregnant and trying to start her own brewery, and there's problems along the way, and the ups and downs of business. And ultimately, I'm reading through this and thinking we're in Minnesota, and these two family members who sort of inadvertently are part of breweries but not together would have to sort of meet up and have a reason to do so, and that does ultimately happen at the end of the story, where they get involved business-wise and then family-wise, and of course it leads finally to a reunion between Edith and Helen, who are now both widows and both senior citizens, or getting into their late 70s and 80s and that sort of thing. And I just found this really moving. And for the most part, I thought there was a lot of witty writing, and I think he just nailed sort of no-nonsense Midwestern attitude for these characters, and he also, I think, had a lot of sympathy for all of his female characters, no matter their age or their situations. I mean, I think in general, maybe you could see Helen as like less sympathetic. I think probably most people would, that her actions were a lot more self-serving. But also you could see she's just someone trying to get ahead in her life as well, and there's just like a lot of, I guess, that Midwestern, do-it-yourself sort of attitude in here. But I also don't think it necessarily, it doesn't step away from the fact that, the finances that are given to you really play a part in how your life turns out. That, Helen got all of the money for the farm and so was able to accrue some capital, whereas Edith always was sort of lower middle class, or ultimately even, maybe lower class, because she didn't have access to that capital. So I feel like he was more honest. He was honest there about how economics work, at least to my understanding. But mostly it's about the characters who really popped, and all of this commentary about, family relationships and work realities, and there's so much in here about beer, which I don't know much about, but speaking of my own Midwestern family, my cousin and his wife actually got married in a craft brewery, so, it means something to a lot of people. And I generally just feel like, the Midwestern affectation of this book, I think I'm going to send this to my aunts in Kansas City. I really feel like I talked with them recently when I was there, and about the types of books they liked, particularly one or two of them. And I feel like this really might be up their alley, and they send me things all the time, or pretty often at very least. So I feel like it'd be really great to be able to send this book to them. I think they really would enjoy it. I hope they would. And the final book I'll talk about here is Knife by Salman Rushdie. This is a much more serious memoir about Rushdie's experience back in 2022. He was giving a talk at a literary event, and a young 24-year-old man rushed the stage and tried to kill him, tried to assassinate him. And this is all because of the fatwa that Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran put on Rushdie's head now decades and decades ago, to the point, I think, where Rushdie, by this point in his life, didn't necessarily feel like his life was in much danger, but here it came back, and he had a really miraculous recovery from this event, and he's talking about the experience and how he views the situation and what his life is like in the sort of chapter-like essays in this book. And that is all I will say about this book now, because I am reading it for the BookTube Prize. The BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard in 2019 for the literary bookternet, particularly on BookTube, to come together and judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published in English in the US the year before. So this year we are reading 2024 releases. We go through 4 rounds, starting with 2 long lists of 48 books per division, and then whittle it down into winners and runners-up. We are now in the second of the 4 rounds, the quarterfinals, and I am reading from nonfiction Group D and pitting this book against 5 others on my ballot, and am zipping my lips about all of this until the round is over, and then I can, give my thoughts. But I did give some preliminary thoughts in a video I'll link down below, as well as linking to the BookTube Prize website. So that about covers it for me now. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long. But we are getting pretty close to the end of April, and I'm hoping to cram a bit more reading in. I'm sure it'll spill over a little into May. But expect to see me back on here, hopefully imminently, to review this poetry collection in its own special video, because it's National Poetry Month, and I want to give poetry a little bit of due. I hope you're all enjoying your reading. I'd love to hear about it, or hear about your thoughts on these books if you have in fact read them. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.